the judges of the New York State Court of Appeals. The Law Day ceremony will now begin. Please remain standing for the national anthem.
You may be seated. Good afternoon. For Judges Smith, Levine, Saparic, Wesley, Rosenblatt, Graffio, and myself, sincere thanks to the Albany High School 9th grade vocal ensemble and to its conductor, Mary Kate Muller. We greatly appreciated your renditions today, and to each and every one of you here, a hearty welcome to Court of Appeals Hall and to our Law Day ceremony. I begin with a smidgen of apology. Really, it's an explanation, especially to all lovers of the great outdoors, for bringing this year's Law Day ceremony from Eagle Street indoors to our courtroom. I, too, have greatly enjoyed our recent sunshine-drenched Law Day ceremonies on the steps of the courthouse, complete with the sight of red, white, and blue banners and the sound of patriotic brass band marches. Except for the smell of hot dogs, that's my vision of a true American celebration for a true American treasure, in this case, Law Day and the rule of law. But this year, our courthouse decoration is distinctly different. Not bright red, white, and blue banners, but classic gray and yellow heavy construction equipment as we prepare for the traditional once every half century or so renovation of our magnificent home. Ironically, the very year Law Day was initiated, back in 1958, was the year of the last major renovation of the Court of Appeals. The court left its home in June of that year and returned to this beautiful, modernized facility in October of 1959. And just to give you a bit of perspective on our modernization, 1959 was the year Xerox introduced its first commercial copier, and it was the year that IBM revolutionized the computer industry by using transistors instead of vacuum tubes. Though the courtroom itself will be little changed in the current renovation, as you see, our portraits have been removed to assure that they remain unharmed while the dust flies. And hard as it is to face the array of construction equipment outdoors, perhaps even more unsettling is the absence of our portraits from the courtroom. They do help to define this space, don't you agree? Beginning with the first Chief Justice of New York State, later United States Chief Justice John Jay, progressing chronologically up through the 19th and 20th centuries all the way to the 21st, these portraits are far more than a wall decoration. They are the faces of the people who have been privileged to serve this court and the public. But even more, they symbolize the seamless evolution and the stable growth of the law through changing, sometimes even tumultuous times. I would say that this has been a particularly challenging year. But I wonder how many of my predecessors, since Law Day began in 1958, felt precisely that way also, with recurring local, national, and international crises. I wonder which among them thought, as I do, that this year surely has been the most different, the world thrust into turmoil, our own state bearing visible scars of a new day. And I wonder which of them thought, as I do, how especially important it is that this year above all others in this state, that we pay tribute to the anchor, the bedrock of American society, the rule of law. This year, I take particular pride in the fact that despite a savage attack, the New York courts, some of them in the very shadow of the World Trade Center, continued to function throughout, barely missing a beat in their service to the public, showing the world the high value we place on our system of justice. For my Court of Appeals colleagues and myself, I thank all of the women and men of the unified court system, and I know many of them are here today, beginning with Presiding Justice Cardona and our colleagues in the Third Department, and the women and men of the Bar of the State of New York, beginning with the President and other presidents of the State Bar and many representatives here. I thank them all, we thank them all, for their phenomenal dedication and determination that kept our doors open and our dockets moving, and we thank the Chief Administrative Judge, too, who has just arrived, lest his entry be unnoticed. Every year, the American Bar Association sets the Law Day theme so that, much like America itself, every celebration across the nation has both a common core and a local flavor. This year's theme is Celebrate Our Freedom, Assuring Equal Justice for All, surely a most appropriate message for these times. After all, our nation's promise of freedom and equal justice is an empty one if our justice system is not accessible. There's a smorgasbord of subjects encompassed by the theme of assuring equal justice. like expanding the availability of legal services for the needy and making the courts better understood, more user-friendly, improving jury service, widening jury pools, educating the public about its legal rights, and on and on. In the New York courts, we pledge ourselves to removing barriers of every sort so that our justice system remains truly accessible to the citizenry. On this law day, I will but briefly highlight 3 subjects that top my list. The first, of course, is the acute need for increases in the 18B rates last adjusted 16 years ago to $25 and $40 an hour. No one has to make a case for increases. That is already widely recognized. Today, I simply underscore the urgency of the issue. Every day that passes is a costly one for the courts, but far more costly for the litigants as the panels shrink and the cases are endlessly adjourned for want of counsel. I express our gratitude to the committed attorneys who, at great personal sacrifice, remain on these vitally needed panels and assure you, all of you, as well as the legal services providers generally, that you have our steadfast support in all of your efforts to secure adequate public funding. Earlier this year, we announced the launch of our Access to Justice Center to serve as a focal point, a catalyst for new ideas, new thinking about possible permanent funding and other issues surrounding the delivery of civil legal services. Indeed, we were assembled right here in Albany on September 11th, planning for the center when disaster struck that day. I'm pleased to report that our Access to Justice Center has now been successfully launched, and along with another marvelous bench bar partnership to strengthen legal services, headed by an extraordinary steering committee, these give us high hopes and great expectations that we will at long last find a lasting way to meet the critical need to assure high-quality legal services for those unable to afford counsel. It hardly needs saying, the availability of quality legal services for the needy is key to assuring equal access to justice. My second related subject is pro bono, and I know the Attorney General also has a particular interest in this subject. For even increases in public funding cannot alone satisfy the vast unmet need for legal services. Bar leaders in the aftermath of September 11 coordinated, communicated, cooperated with one another and with the courts as never before, dividing up responsibilities, creating new programs, sharing information, publishing comprehensive resource guides and materials virtually overnight. Thousands upon thousands of lawyers responded to the call for volunteers, helping families obtain death certificates to access assets, working at the Family Assistance Center and other locations, filing claims with the Victims' Compensation Fund, counseling people in every possible way, ways that run the gamut of human imagination. The fact is, our recent experience, our September 11 experience, has taught us important lessons about the delivery of legal services. We learned, for example, the value of bar associations across the state working together cooperatively, and the State Bar particularly exhibited extraordinary leadership. We learned the value of 21st century technology for linking clients and lawyers and providing training and assistance. We learned the value of bringing together all relevant resources for a needy population, one telephone call to a hotline, one visit to a website, one trip to an office. We learned the value of comprehensive training and materials, detailed how-tos and contact information. And perhaps what we learned above all in the aftermath of September 11, and surely we did not learn this for the first time, is the bar's generosity, its admirable character, its commitment to helping people in need. And so now it is for all of us to gather up these important lessons and put them to good use, to retain, to nurture, to enlarge the spirit of volunteerism, to make it both easy and meaningful for attorneys to meet their professional obligation. That's another task for the Access to Justice Center and the Steering Committee, and equally for every single one of us. We cannot, we must not lose the luster on the shining hour of the New York Bar. Finally, What could be more fundamental to assuring equal access to justice than a sensible court structure, one that eases rather than complicates the burdens of litigants? Like chief judges before me, I will continue the effort to amend our Constitution to streamline New York State's needlessly complicated court structure. The mission remains the same always: simplification. Simplification in the interests of the public, simplification in the interests of the courts. But this year, our plan is a new one, trimmed back to its barest essentials and focused like a laser beam on our most vulnerable population: families, children, especially those touched by the modern-day scourge of domestic violence. These are the people who are so often whipsawed among our courts: family court, criminal court, Supreme Court, and on and on and on. Ironically, no one knows the jurisdictional hurdles of our arcane court structure better than a litigant who is bent on proliferating the troubles of a former intimate partner and their children. Only moments ago, I participated in a rally. Judge Lippman was present there as well, and that's why he's forgiven for his lateness. But we both participated in a rally on the steps of the Capitol in support of court restructuring. Imagine that. A rally on the steps of the Capitol for court restructuring. We could not make a greater stride toward assuring equal justice for all than to unify, simplify, restructure our court system by this year beginning a legislative process that will lead to a really important constitutional reform. I conclude my Law Day remarks by coming full circle from the steps of the Capitol back to this courthouse, back to this courtroom. Here, our renovation will preserve the very best of what we have been privileged to receive from the past, while at the same time enabling us through new ways and new ideas to meet the enormous challenges of this already daunting century. We need to do this in the law so that it remains relevant to an evolving society. We need to do this in our own beloved Court of Appeals hall, marble alongside microchips. We need to do this in the structure of the unified court system. The modern-day demands of society are simply not well served by the splintered court structure of a bygone era. We need to do this in every way possible so that the great 18th century ideal of equal justice upon which this nation was founded remains a 21st century reality for needy New Yorkers, indeed for all New Yorkers. Thank you so much. It is now my privilege to call upon our Lieutenant Governor, Mary O'Donoghue, and it is my privilege always to introduce her with what I consider to be the ultimate accolade, Judge Donoghue.
Attorney General Spitzer, New York State Bar Association President Judge Lippman, and all of the guests here this afternoon to celebrate Law Day. As a former private practitioner, district attorney, and judge, I always look forward to this day, when I see my many friends, colleagues, law students, and citizens taking time to reflect upon the enormous role that the law plays in our society. While pondering our theme to prepare remarks that might encourage hard debate, I was reminded of Aristotle's commentary in 332 BC that if liberty and equality, as thought by some, are chiefly to be found in democracy, they will best be attained when all people alike share in the government to the utmost. This year's theme can encompass many topics, from the general, such as the mandate of our Constitution and laws, that our legal system provide justice to all, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, sex, disability, or economic status. To some more specific topics, like the importance of properly compensating assigned counsel and litigants, pro bono publico activities by our state bar, and the enormous opportunity and benefit that court restructuring promises. Having an inkling that Chief Judge Kaye might be focusing on these last three topics, favorite issues of hers that we know they are, knowing firsthand of our unequal advocacy, and most importantly, mindful of the order of speakers and the patience of you, our audience, I decided to look elsewhere for a theme. Some of the law day materials suggested that a discussion regarding equal justice could encompass both court improvement projects as well as reforms in our schools and the adoption, for example, of an alternative dispute resolution program. Well, I thought, equal justice in our schools. Now there's a topic I can wrap my arms around. As a former teacher, it has been a priority of mine to ensure that our schools are the safe and secure environment our children need in order to reach their potential. The governor asked me, as many of you know, to chair the task force on school violence, which made recommendations that are now incorporated into the Safe Schools Against Violence and Education Act, signed by the governor in July of 2000. However current it might have been to detail for you the efforts we're now making across our city to promote character education, a critical component of the state law, I decided it was most appropriate to focus our debate today on another issue, one that offers the mechanism by which all of those reforms will be most expeditiously achieved, the power of initiative and referendum. Recognizing that public opinion always demands of the law, the governor and myself recently renewed our commitment to a constitutional amendment that would confer directly upon the people of this great state broad powers of initiative and referendum. Since that renewal, I've been traveling the state, gathering and hopefully generating increased support for this proposal. It's a fundamental reform to empower everyone by enabling them to place a proposed constitutional or statutory change directly on the ballot and vote directly for or against it, or to vote for or against laws that have already been enacted by the legislature. This proposal would allow New Yorkers to initiate reforms both at the state as well as the local level that enjoy broad-based popular support, but that it becomes tied up in a legislative process that occasionally or frequently, depending on your perspective, are unresponsive to the needs of the electorate. By adopting this process, New Yorkers will join citizens of 27 other states who in some cases have enjoyed and used this power for 100 years. How, you might ask, is this proposal relevant to today's theme, our collective quest for equal justice for all our citizens? To that question, I must ask in return, is there any greater justice than that derived from a responsive government, a government that leads when popular sentiment is antithetical to our constitutional freedoms, but that follows when the people's will commands it to do so? Initiative and referendum are not now being recommended as a replacement to our representative democracy, but simply as a check and balance on those in political power, where inertia too often rules the legislative process. Opponents of such a measure tell us we should be fearful of initiative and referendum, that it is simply direct democracy, which could hamstring the operation of the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branches. Despite those warnings of the fearmongers and the naysayers, initiative and referendum has been supported and proposed by the bipartisan who's who of American political legends: Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Milton, among many others. Like them, I do not see our citizens, nor should any one of us. Moreover, the history of initiative and referendum belies the criticism that it will be used all too frequently and without due consideration by the electorate. There have been approximately 1,911 initiatives on statewide ballots in 100 years. Only 799 of those have been adopted, a passage rate of only 40%. Rather than something to be feared, initiative and referendum have had positive effects upon the political process. In a time when we lament voter apathy and low election day turnout, initiative as well as referendum have historically increased voter participation. Why? Very simply, because we know that when people recognize that their vote makes a difference, they get out and participate. If it is true, as Governor Alfred E. Smith once said, that all the ills of democracy can be cured by more democracy, aren't those statistics alone sufficient? Not only has the initiative and referendum process resulted in greater citizen participation and enhanced public understanding of our laws, which is really an end in and of itself, it has resulted in the passage of needed reforms, campaign finance reform, environmental protection reform, tax reform, death penalty consideration have all been the object of initiative and referendum. Most significant, though, its very existence provides the impetus to break legislative logjam. No longer will the legislature and the executive be able to ignore some of the greatest issues of our day. No less a jurist than the so-called 10th Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Bernard Hand, who, by the way, was born here in Albany, educated just feet from the steps of this great court, the Albany Academy. He once remarked that justice, I think, is the tolerable accommodation of the conflicting interests of society. And I don't believe there is any royal road to attain such accommodation completely. If, as Bernard Hand said, there is no royal road, no single road to equal justice, cannot the initiative and referendum process be another road on which we together can reach our common destination? Let us forge a path, a new path, to reform the democratic process. Remembering President Carter's admonition that the law is not the private property of the legislature or of lawyers, nor justice the exclusive province of judge and jury. In the final analysis, true justice, equal justice, the theme of our law day this year, is not a matter of courts and law books, but a commitment in each of us to liberty and to mutual respect. I do trust the people of the great state of New York to do in the end what is right and just, and to create a society that provides for equal justice under the law. We need look no further than the heinous attack of September 11th to recognize the courage, the perseverance, and the integrity of all New Yorkers. This, in and of itself, should renew our allegiance to the principle that Abraham Lincoln enunciated in 1863 in his Gettysburg Address. In circumstances similar to those that Lincoln faced, our nation is at war. We have suffered enormous loss of life and endured constant threats of attack that challenge our dedication to our founding principles. So on a day, this day, as we celebrate the liberty that our Constitution and laws provide, and as we recognize the dedication and skill of our judges, our attorneys, our court officers, our juries, and of all who work in our legal system, let us rededicate ourselves to the greatest task ever before us. In the words of Lincoln, and I quote, "From From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom in its government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Donahue. I'm so pleased to know that we're both interested in amending our state constitution. I'd next like to call upon our Attorney General, Elliot Spitzer, for his Law Day message.
Thank you, Chief Judge Kaye, members of the court. This is my fourth opportunity to deliver a Law Day address, and each of these occasions has been valuable to me because each has allowed me to focus and reflect on the unique role of law in our society. I hope to be invited back to celebrate Law Day with you again next year, a desire perhaps appreciated best by those in the audience whose terms expire in even years. Nearly a decade ago, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously warned of the dangers to any society that was, quote, defining deviancy down. By that phrase, Senator Moynihan was referring to the increasing tolerance for formerly intolerable conduct, whether that conduct involved engaging in violent or criminal activity or the shirking of responsibility for one's actions. His thesis, and I quote, was that the amount of deviant behavior in American society has increased beyond the levels the community can afford to recognize, and that, accordingly, we have been redefining deviancy so as to exempt much conduct previously stigmatized. I want to talk today about a similar problem, one that involves not the conduct of individuals, but of our society's leading institutions, whether financial, professional, charitable, or religious. The mandate of these institutions is to serve their investors and shareholders, their contributors and members, and in many cases, the public. Yet even as they pursue these objectives, we have required them to operate within certain boundaries, delineated by carefully articulated standards of conduct, disclosure, and moral responsibility. Institutions are required to act in accordance with these standards even when they conflict with pure self-interest. Yet recently, abiding by these standards has come to be viewed as an impractical ideal instead of a practiced reality. As a result, these institutions too often have begun to act in a manner that has violated these boundaries and generated a public mistrust and cynicism. Our gradual dissipation of expectations for institutional behavior has now created a crisis of accountability, as the failure of these institutions to abide by proper standards has been exposed to the general public. Our silence in the face of this decline was perhaps understandable. Because these institutions play such a vital role in our society, the public was hesitant to challenge them. Stories that should have raised concerns of possible misconduct were met not with inquiry and outrage, but with a lowering of the standard of what we would consider to be acceptable. Internally, standards declined incrementally year after year, such that one off-balance sheet partnership bred exponentially more as the years rolled by. And externally, inquiry and accountability were both avoided and evaded. We allowed thin assurances of propriety to serve as a proxy for vigorous accountability guarding against impropriety. Sadly, the events of this past year have taught us that we have more to lose by lowering our standards than we do from expressing skepticism and demanding accountability. Because after years of downward pressure, the intertwined threads of public trust that give these institutions their true strength have become terribly frayed. At the heart of this breach of trust is an ever-increasing opaqueness in the operation of these institutions. The lack of transparency and absence of accountability to the constituencies served by these entities only heightened the distrust that developed when inappropriate conduct was finally exposed. I would like to take a moment to outline the breaches of trust that we have witnessed this past year, and would then like to offer a proposal that recognizes that the law and our legal institutions can play a singular role in mending that breach. When Arthur Andersen knows that his clients are issuing misleading financial statements, but refuses to publicly disclose that information in its audits, we must ask, do our nation's accounting firms serve the investing public, or are they so beholden to the clients whose books and accounts they are supposed to be reviewing that they fail to state the truth? When Enron and its chief executives can engage in numerous transactions to hide the true value of its business from shareholders and employees, we must ask, why are public companies placing the interests of the executives who run the companies before the interests of their shareholders who own the companies? When internal communications reveal Merrill Lynch research analysts disparaging the very stocks they are recommending to millions of hardworking families seeking guidance on how to invest their life savings and their children's college fund, we must ask, do their investment recommendations serve the investor to whom they owe a duty of loyalty and honesty, or to their investment banking clients? When Hale House ignores the infants it was established to assist and uses the funds contributed to Care for Children to underwrite lavish home renovations for its chief executive, we must stand up and ask, do our charities remember that their purpose is to assist the less fortunate and not to amass a fortune? When the American Red Cross unilaterally decides to shift donations intended to help the victims of the September 11 terrorist attacks into its general fund, we must ask, do our charities recognize that their actions must be guided by their donors' intent and not their institutional interests? And when church leaders respond to reports that members of the clergy may be interacting inappropriately with parishioners and their children, with an eye toward protecting the abuser instead of comforting the abused, we must ask, have our religious leaders forgotten that their service of God demands that it is the abused and not the abuser who is entitled to protection? For too long, we allowed these institutions to focus inward without regard for the effect of their actions on those they were duty-bound to serve. We allowed them to trade on the trust we placed in them by accepting a model of self-policing whose currency was not in accountability, but in assurances. Those assurances were too often hollow, and that currency has now been substantially devalued. Since this crisis, and it indeed is a crisis when so many of our leading institutions have at once betrayed the public, was caused by a breach of trust, any solution must restore that trust. We must bridge the ever-widening divide separating the public's expectation that these entities act in their constituents' interests and the institutional insularity that has led them to ignore that duty. An eminent social scientist has said that, quote, trust is the expectation that the faith one places in an individual or institution will be honored. It demands vulnerability and grows through small risks, end quote. But because it accumulates so slowly, the process of restoring a shattered trust is a lengthy one. Unfortunately, we do not have time to wait for the public to develop a renewed sense of trust in these institutions. Too much will be lost during the time that this process naturally unfolds. I would like to suggest today that there is a method to restore this trust quickly and effectively. Society's defense against misplaced trust must be found in a system of law that will make trust in our institutions both reasonable and prudent. If our legal system operates as it should, we will uncover the abuses of trust, like those that I outlined a moment ago. We will bring them to the public's attention, and we will demand the implementation of systemic changes to ensure that this dereliction of duty does not reoccur. In this way, our legal system can serve as a bridge over the chasm of distrust, separating the public from these institutions. The faith that was once reserved for these institutions and their policies of self-policing will be restored by a renewed reliance on our legal system and its insistence on accountability. For this to work, the law must demand, and these institutions must accept, that standards of behavior that were being ignored must now be strictly followed. The rigorous enforcement of existing laws and codes of conduct will ensure that these institutions are accountable to the broad public they are meant to serve, and not their own narrow institutional interests. I would like to return to the examples that I provided earlier to describe how this might work. We need to insist that our Big Five, perhaps soon to be 4, accounting firms return to their roots as auditors and separate their auditing function, where they stand at arm's length from their clients, and their consulting practices, where the client's interest is paramount. We need to insist that public companies report results that reflect reality and not clever gamesmanship, and that allow investors to understand their true financial position. We need to insist on a system that requires Wall Street firms to compensate their analysts based on the quality of their research instead of the investment banking fees they generate. And we need to require these firms to disclose the fees they receive from the companies that they rate and their relationship with them. We need to insist that our charitable and not-for-profit organizations are led by directors who understand the nature of their responsibility, which is to achieve their charitable mandate and to lead their organizations, and not merely to act as rubber stamps for entrenched staff members. We need to insist that our religious leaders are not treated differently than others in positions caring for children, and are required to report any suspicion of abuse to district attorneys for investigation. I recognize that these proposals do not fully address the problems arising from this crisis of accountability, but it is important that we understand that this crisis exists, that it has already damaged important institutions, and that we must take immediate action to restore the faith of a betrayed public. Taken together, the ideas that I have suggested can signal to a disenchanted public that our system of law can provide, indeed can itself be, the solution to the crisis created by the betrayal of their trust. Our insistence on a comprehensive system of accountability will announce to a nervous public, to investors and stockholders, to congregants and clergy, to those who contribute to charity as well as those supported by charity, to litigants and lawyers, that our legal system will narrow the breach created by this distrust. Those of us here today who have devoted our professional lives to the law are especially attuned to the ability of our legal system to mend breaches of public trust. The glorious history of our civil rights movement is perhaps the most shining example of how the law can be the effective tool to repair the fractured faith of a disenfranchised and betrayed public. Many of us were inspired to become lawyers by the hard-fought victories won by the heroes of the civil rights movement. As we reflect on those victories and our own personal decision to enter the law, we should also remember this important lesson. Whatever the battle, a renewed reliance on our system of law will always prove to be a potent force for achieving change and restoring public faith. I think that this marks an appropriate moment to offer my recognition and gratitude to Chief Judge Kaye for her inspired and intelligent leadership of the state's judicial system. Judge Kaye has long been in the vanguard of efforts to improve the state's judicial system, most recently through her tireless advocacy to fairly compensate lawyers who represent indigent clients and to ensure that all are afforded equal access to justice. Those efforts, along with her efforts to reform the Rockefeller drug laws and to ensure that the courts are hospitable to victims of domestic violence, reflect a sensitivity to the ideals of justice that explain why the New York judiciary maintains the great respect of the public. The public's esteem and respect for our legal and judicial system is the foundation upon which the proposals that I have outlined today rest. Judge Kaye, members of the court, I thank you, and we all thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Spitzer. You, the Solicitor General, and the excellent members of your staff, many of them here today, always are most welcome at Court of Appeals Hall. I would next like to introduce my former law clerk, who happily for all of us is the President of the Bar Association of the State of New York, Stephen Crane.
Thank you, former boss, Chief Judge Kaye, honorable members of the court, my friends, good afternoon. So I'm relieved to see I'm sitting on the respondent's side of the table, and also relieved to see that the white and red lights are not in operation today. I've looked forward to this day for many months, 1 full year to be precise. I recall sitting out in front of this great courthouse on May 1st, 2001, knowing that I would have the opportunity to address this remarkable gathering of our state's leadership in 1 year's time. I decided 1 year ago what my message to you would be today. I never anticipated that intervening events would make that message all the more significant. Join me in revisiting the roots of Law Day. I am sure most of you know the reason why Law Day was created, but for those who don't, a brief history lesson may be in order. The idea for Law Day was born in 1957, in general a good year for births, if I do say so myself. But unlike me, Law Day was born out of the mind of another 45-year-old Bar Association president named Charles S. Rhine. As president of the ABA, he asked President Eisenhower to proclaim a day of national dedication to the principle of government under law, which would afford us an opportunity to better understand and appreciate the manifold virtues of such a government and to focus the attention of the world upon them. Now, there were those in the Eisenhower administration who opposed a presidential proclamation that, in their view, did nothing more than praise lawyers, even though not a word in the draft proclamation said anything about members of the bar. I guess some things never change. But ABA President Rhine continued to lobby for the creation of Law Day, enlisting the support of key members of the administration, most notably Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and Attorney General William P. Rogers, both of whom were also esteemed lawyers. Rhine argued that proclaiming our nation's dedication to rule of law government and calling upon our people to celebrate that dedication on May 1st, 1958, would stand in stark contrast to the celebrations in the Soviet Union expected to take place that very day. He had in mind the traditional May Day parade of Russian tanks and other armaments that would pass through Red Square so that Soviet leaders on the reviewing stand along the wall of the Kremlin could celebrate their dedication to dictator government by force. President Rhine reasoned that a Law Day celebration would help our Cold War conflict with communism as we continued to strive to convince other nations to follow our lead to individual freedom under the rule of law. President Rhine's vision prevailed, and today, as we did on the first Law Day in 1958, we celebrate the principle of guaranteed fundamental rights of individuals under the law. As President Eisenhower's proclamation stated, that principle is the heart and sinew of our nation and distinguishes our governmental system from the type that rules by might alone. We won the Cold War. During the Reagan-Bush years, communist regimes came crashing down, finally succumbing to the sheer strength of the innate passion of humanity for freedom. While it was in large measure the idea of government by law, not by force, that prevailed in that war, it was also our capability and willingness to defend ourselves against those who challenged our sovereignty that prevented the Cold War from turning hot and ultimately resulted in a victory for democracy. As in virtually every other post-war period in our history, after the dust of the Cold War settled, we unfortunately decided that we didn't need a strong defense any longer. We naively assumed that we had removed all significant threats to our security. It was a mistake that we have made over and over again in our history. We had not learned from our experience after the Great War, the so-called war to end all wars, or in the period between the end of the Second World War and the start 5 years later of the Korean War, in both instances leaving us with an outdated, understaffed, and underfunded military. We let down our guard, forgetting that there is always someone out there who is jealous of our freedoms, of our prosperity under a capitalist system, and of our position as the greatest nation in the world. The importance of maintaining a strong national defense can no longer be disputed. We must never assume that we are completely secure, because we most certainly are not, as we witnessed 8 months ago through the graphic drama of live television. I hope we do not also have to relearn the fact that not all threats are new ones. In 1965, the humorist Tom Lehrer wrote a song in which he spoke sardonically about national security and a proposal to place nuclear weapons under international control. observing a short 20 years after the end of World War II that in such an arrangement, quote, one of the fingers on the button would be German, he offered this rhyme, which I will not sing. Once all the Germans were warlike and mean, but that couldn't happen again. We taught them a lesson in 1918, and they've hardly bothered us since then. How true those dark words are. Defeated enemies can rise again. Are we really sure that we have seen the last of Soviet communism? Are there not other defeated regimes that can rise again? Surely we know that there are forces in our world with the potential for mass destruction, whether they threaten to harness the power of the atom, or to spread infectious diseases, or even to use commercial airliners as incendiary bombs. Now, you may be asking yourselves, what does all this have to do with Law Day? The answer is simple. As we sit here today, celebrating government by the rule of law, we must never forget just how delicate our freedom remains. We should remember how our court system was called upon to do the impossible in the days and weeks following the September 11th attacks so that our justice system might carry on its operations. Under the strong, resolute leadership of our Chief Judge, the Honorable Judith S. Kaye, and of our Chief Administrative Judge, the Honorable Jonathan Lippman, both of whom showed incredible courage coupled with a steadfast refusal to be defeated, our courts were up and running within hours of the attack, our judges ensuring that there would continue to be a place for people to come to protect their rights under law. I know of no better place than in the highest court of our state for us to honor the men and women of our judiciary for what they do day in and day out, and for their remarkable achievements this past year in the face of unspeakable adversity. Join with me as well in praising our military men and women both at home and abroad, who stand vigil over our freedom and make it possible for us to live in a nation governed by the rule of law. They do not get nearly a fraction of the honor and respect they deserve. I urge you to celebrate Law Day today by finding a member of the armed forces or a veteran of those forces. When you do, thank them for their sacrifices, past, present, and future. Let us also urge our legislators to give our armed forces the tools they need to protect us. We cannot sacrifice long-term security for a perceived short-term fiscal benefit. We cannot afford to fall victim to that kind of short-sightedness yet again. Our armed forces must always be ready to fight and to win America's wars. They must be maintained at high states of readiness, fully functioning and well-equipped. They must be prepared to respond to an endless variety of contingencies in what promises to be an unpredictable and dangerous future. Adequate military funding, wisely spent, is critical to the preservation of our freedom. Our security depends on making our defense our first national priority. Finally, we should never be hesitant to praise lawyers. We members of the bar are the bridge between the rule of law and the system of justice we treasure. We belong to a great and learned profession with roots deep in antiquity. Let us not forget the good we have done and the greatness of which we are capable, individually and collectively. Some may snipe at us or make us the butt of ill-conceived jokes, but we lawyers must always remember who we are and be proud. So celebrate Law Day, reflect upon the greatness of our system of government, honor those who make it possible for us to have guaranteed individual rights under the law, and never forget just how fragile is all that we treasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, Mr. Crane. 3 fascinating Law Day messages, I would say, wouldn't you? We now reach an important point in our Law Day ceremony, which is a time that we honor the heroes within our own court system And I would like to call upon the Chief Administrative Judge, Jonathan Lippman, to make those presentations.
Thank you, Chief Judge. On this Law Day 2002, with the tragic events of last September still fresh in our minds and hearts, we in the courts celebrate our freedoms with renewed commitment. It has been our tradition each Law Day to honor the men and women of our workforce whose exemplary personal achievements and high professionalism are representative of the spirit and accomplishments of the court system's entire workforce. On this Law Day, we are privileged to recognize two remarkable individuals, one for his commitment to innovation in the courts, the other for ensuring the safety of all who enter our courthouse doors. Now, more than ever before, we should stop to recognize those among us who have demonstrated in so many ways what public service means in a time of national crisis. On behalf of the Unified Court System, today's distinguished honorees and their families and co-workers, I wish to thank Chief Judge Kaye, the Associate Judges of the Court of Appeals, and Attorney General Spitzer for again making these presentations an important part of the Court of Appeals Law Day 2002 program. In regard to the first award, I want to first thank the State Bar and the Court System's Center for Court Innovation for sponsoring the first Law Day Innovation Award, which will be given annually to an individual who exemplifies the spirit of innovation in the justice system. The winner of the first Law Day 2002 Court Innovation Award is the Honorable Michael L. Pesci, Presiding Justice of the Appellate Term, 2nd and 11th Judicial Districts. Judge Pesci could not be with us today, but I want to call up to represent him his law clerk, Miriam Cyrilnik, and James Imperatrice and Tom Kilfoyle, the clerks of the Supreme Court, 2nd Judicial District. Would you come forward, please?
No, that's
After coming to America from Italy at the age of 12, Michael L. Pesci quickly gained a deep love for his new country and an abiding interest in making government work for people. For virtually all of his professional life, he has served the public, first in the state legislature, then on the bench as a trial judge, and until very recently as the administrative judge of the 2nd Judicial District, encompassing the very busy and challenging New York City boroughs of Brooklyn and Staten Island. For the 6 years that he was administrative judge, Mike Pesci took on some of the most difficult challenges confronting our society and the courts today: crime, recidivism, drug addiction, domestic violence, and mental illness. One of his first projects as administrative judge was to start the Brooklyn Treatment Court. Rather than recycling defendants through the criminal justice system without treating the root cause of their criminal activities, the Treatment Court provides drug-addicted offenders with substance abuse treatment and other services. The court closely and actively monitors these defendants who must return frequently to court to report on their progress. Good behavior is rewarded. Failure in treatment is punished, often with jail time. Defendants also complete a community service requirement, paying back the community they have harmed. The results of this experiment in justice have been extraordinary. A majority of offenders have completed long-term treatment, and hundreds of offenders have returned to sober, productive lives. Today, the Brooklyn Treatment Court serves as a statewide and national model for problem-solving courts. Judge Pesci also oversaw the creation of the first domestic violence court in New York State. A specially trained court team, judges, attorneys, victim advocates, and a resource coordinator ensures that defendants are monitored rigorously, victims have access to comprehensive services, including safe housing and job training, and the judge has the information necessary to make quick and effective decisions that protect the safety of victims. This innovative experiment has produced outstanding results, cutting in half the probation violation rate for domestic violence offenders. These nationally renowned courts could never have been successful without Judge Pesci's passionate commitment, without his willingness to take risks, and to ask always, how can we do things better? Most recently, Judge Pesci was very much involved in another first for New York, the Brooklyn Mental Health Court, which is set to open this summer. This court offers a new approach designed to stop mentally ill offenders from getting lost in the often revolving door of the criminal justice system. Nonviolent offenders will be placed in treatment, rigorously monitored, and offered extensive services to help them rebuild their lives and become stable, productive citizens once again. For Judge Pesci's remarkable success in introducing innovations that have helped reduce recidivism, make communities safer, and improve public confidence in the administration of justice, the New York State Bar Association and the Court System Center for Court Innovation salute him with the first Court Innovation Award. Thank you. I'd like to ask Steve Crane, the president of State Bar Association, and Greg Berman. Greg, are you here? The head of the acting director of the Center for Court Innovation, to come up and present the award. This is only a temporary award. A bigger and better award is being prepared. It's underway. Miriam will now say a few words on Judge Pesci's behalf. Mary?
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Judge Kaye, Chief Administrative Judge Lippman, Lieutenant Governor Donahue, Attorney General Spitzer, President Crane, most distinguished judges and justices, colleagues, and friends. It's actually an interesting take on the judge-law clerk relationship when the judge writes the speech for the law clerk to deliver. I could get used to it, actually. Judge Pesci, as you've heard, is presently visiting his hometown in Italy, attending a wedding, and he wishes to thank all of you for this unique honor. He's asked me to accept this award on his behalf and to read the brief remarks that he would have been thrilled to deliver in person. I'm truly honored to receive the first annual Court Innovation Award, presented as a partnership between the New York State Bar Association and the Center for Court Innovation, because it is collaborative effort that was the hallmark of all the innovative projects being recognized here today. Under the visionary leadership of Chief Judge Judith Kaye and Chief Administrative Judge Jonathan Lippman, the courts are fashioning new responses to some of society's most formidable problems, including drug abuse, domestic violence, and mental illness. The Chief Judge and the Chief Administrative Judge have afforded me many wonderful opportunities to work with them on innovative and exciting projects, and I thank them for the continued support and confidence in me. The ambitious experiments for which Brooklyn has become famous were conceived and developed by the award-winning Center for Court Innovation. John Feinblatt and his exceptional staff brought tremendous expertise and energy to every project they brought to Brooklyn. I simply had the good sense to say yes when they had a proposal. It was often said in Brooklyn, not completely in jest, that if OCA wondered if a new initiative could work, they would set up a pilot project. If OCA wanted to be sure the new initiative would definitely work, they would set up a pilot project in Brooklyn. Of course, if you counted the number of programs we've implemented in Brooklyn during the 6 years I served as administrative judge, you would easily understand that it wasn't humanly possible for one person to do it all, and I didn't. I have had the good fortune of working with people of vision and talent, and their efforts have made me look good. In essence, I'm receiving an award for being lucky. The success of our initiatives has depended upon hard work and a commitment to excellence starting at the top. I would like to recognize and thank the two individuals perhaps most responsible for that success, the Chief Clerks of Kings County Supreme Court, James Imperatrice and Tom Kilfoyle. My and your sincere thanks should also go to Justices Joseph Bruno, Cheryl Chambers, Matthew Demet, Joanne Ferdinand, Abraham Gurgis, and John Leventhal, to Court Clerk Specialist Donna Farrell, to the dozens of non-judicial personnel, team players of every rank and title who are committed to providing quality service without regard to honors and awards, and of course, I like this part, to my staff, Miriam Thorolnik and Karen Schwartz. He wrote it. In a 1999 article in Newsweek magazine, Chief Judge Kaye declared that, quote, with a problem-solving attitude, we can make a real difference in the lives of litigants and in the communities in which we all live. And in the end, that comes pretty close to the dream that drew so many of us to the law and to judicial service in the first place. All of these initiatives have as their common objective seeking to discover the best in others, in all who come to the courthouse and in all who work in the courthouse. By seeking to discover the best in others, we somehow bring out the best in ourselves. Thank you.
Our second award, the Law Day 2002 Service Award, is given to Matthew O'Reilly, Chief of the Department of Public Safety of the Statewide Unified Court System. Matt, would you come forward, please? When tragedy struck our nation on September 11th, the New York State court system was fortunate to have the right man in the right job at the right time. Chief O'Reilly, who has devoted most of his professional career to ensuring the safety of the courts, reacted true to form. In a time of extreme insecurity and anxiety, he was the epitome of leadership, calm, strong, reassuring, and always decisive. On September 11th, he immediately set up a central command and control post and established communications with security personnel at each courthouse in the New York City metropolitan area. Within hours of the disaster, he had command of the situation and was coordinating our efforts with officials from the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department, and countless city, state, and federal agencies. As soon as it was possible to do so, Chief O'Reilly went to Ground Zero, where court security officers Captain Harry Thompson and senior court officers Tommy Juergens and Mitch Wallace were known to be missing while helping the victims of the 9/11 tragedy. The devastation, while deeply disturbing, only increased his determination to protect the courts and prevent the further loss of life. As the enormity of the disaster and the nature of the continuing threat became clear, he faced a number of daunting tasks. In the days and weeks immediately following September 11th, Chief O'Reilly implemented emergency security measures for each courthouse, including a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security presence. He also collaborated with state and federal law enforcement agencies on a plan to secure the large state and federal courthouse complex just a few short blocks north of Ground Zero. In these difficult days, all of us in the courts, but especially the chief judge, myself, and the administrative judges, relied heavily on Matt, turning to him again and again for practical assistance, advice, and reassurance. As issue after issue emerged, always demanding an immediate response, he was there every time to work out a statewide courthouse evacuation protocol, to devise and implement new mail handling procedures, to immediately address the security vulnerabilities of individual courthouses. In addition to these around-the-clock efforts, Chief O'Reilly was handling a more personal, perhaps even more difficult obligation. As all of us in the courts tried to cope with the loss of the 3 court officers, he was truly a tower of strength for the families and colleagues of the heroes. Matt personally took it upon himself to make sure that the officers' loved ones were constantly supported and surrounded by the members of their court family. He was there to ensure that the heartbreaking memorials for the officers were the solemn tributes those heroes richly deserved. And just 6 weeks ago, he was there again, this time at Ground Zero, in the middle of the night, with an honor guard that he quickly assembled upon receiving word that the remains of the lost officers had finally been recovered. Chief O'Reilly's resolve and resiliency under difficult, if not chaotic conditions, was an example of leadership at its best. For his extraordinary dedication to preserving the safety of the courts and the public in the aftermath of September 11th, we proudly and gratefully honor him with this special Law Day 2002 Service Award. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Lippman, for those kind words. As many of those who work with me know, I'd rather not focus on myself, and I have some difficulty sometimes with compliments, but I will say that I accept this award today really on behalf of all those I work with and continue to work with, but in particular during those difficult times after 9/11. The leadership that was inspirational from the top down was what kept me going through those dark times. And I must say, the ongoing love and support from my family was critical to me. And they're here today, and they'll always be in my thoughts. And that's the real key to getting the job done. I'd be remiss today if I didn't mention of 3 officers who we lost, Harry, Mitch, and Tommy, and they'll never be forgotten. And they'll always be in our hearts. And that was a tough time for all of us, but I'm particularly proud of all of us in the court system who stood up and got the job done during that occasion. Again, it was the leadership from the chief judge, particularly Judge Kay and Judge Lippman and Judge Fow and the deputy chief administrative judges and the administrative judges who kept me going. We had some real interesting meetings after that time frame, but they got the job done and they made sure I got the job done. So once again, thank you, and thank you for your continued support, and I'll continue with my dedication. Thank you.
Congratulations, Chief O'Reilly. Congratulations, Judge Pesci, and all of your wonderful representatives. Thank you again to our terrific speakers today. We thank you, my Court of Appeals colleagues and I thank all of you, Mayor Jennings, and all of you there here in the audience for your attention, for helping us to celebrate Law Day, and maybe above all for your commitment to equal justice under law. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Very nice. Excellent.